There's 7 things that I wish I would have known about editing photos when I first started photography. Number 1, it's important to know what your clients want. So I have this listed as the first thing because before you even begin the editing process, you need to know exactly where you want to take your images, and a lot of that has to do with what the clients want. It's important to sit down with your clients and have a real conversation and ask them things like, what's the vibe you're going for in this project? When someone looks at these images, how do you want them to feel? And what kind of style best fits your brand? But before you have this conversation, go to the company's website, figure out their color scheme and their brand messaging. And by knowing this beforehand, you can ask them things like, are you looking for the same kind of color scheme, or are you looking to do something a little bit new? Honestly, from the start of my career, I didn't really know how to have these conversations with clients because I thought that honestly it would make me look really amateur. But by asking these specific questions, I would have actually appeared more professional than what I thought. Honestly, companies just want to know that you have their best interest in mind, that you're not just going to try and create something that you feel is aesthetically pleasing, but it's something that's going to speak to their audience and express who they are as a brand. Number 2, there's power in reference images. By using reference images, you can push your creative style and create new looks. So how you can best utilize this within Lightroom is you download an image, import it into Lightroom, and then in the bottom left corner, you're gonna see an RNA box. And then you're just gonna drag your reference image, pull it up into the frame. Now you can take your image and grade it just like your reference image. This makes things much easier to accomplish the look that you're going for. I really wish that the photo editing platform was more advanced, just like the video editing platform. I mean, I got really spoiled with DaVinci Resolve. That would allow me to analyze both images, figure out the highlights, midtone, shadows, and extract all that information so I could really hone in a look that I'm going for. But until we do get those tools, I think that the color grading tool is gonna be your best bet to really hone in a look. Number 3, always balance your shots. Before you ever do any adjustments or color grading, it is always the best practice to do color balance within your images. It's best to do this first because you're gonna have the full range of natural colors to work with right off the bat. If you're really trying to push a look with an unbalanced image, you're gonna start to introduce fracturing and banding. In a non-technical term, fracturing is when your colors begin to separate and it kind of looks like noise within your color. When a color bands, it doesn't have the natural roll-off within its environment. You'll want to avoid these 2 things because it's characteristic of a beginner editor and it doesn't produce a high-quality image. If you first balance your image, you're going to seamlessly be able to push your color grades. Number 4, shape the light in an image. Now we do have another video on this topic specifically, but by doing this one thing, it drastically enhanced my photography beyond anything else, so I just want to highlight this again. So by using linear and radial gradient masks, you can draw more attention to your subject, allowing the viewer to know where they should be looking. Let's hop into Lightroom quick and I'll show you exactly how I would use this in one of my images. Okay, so I'm gonna use this image as a reference here. So we're gonna go into our masks. I'm gonna use a linear gradient here. I'm just gonna scale out. And so what I wanna do is I wanna direct more attention to my subject. So I'm gonna use a linear gradient, pulling in from the bottom. Really gonna feather that out. So the red mark here is basically the mask and how aggressive that comes into our frame. So I'm gonna pull that down, lower the exposure, lower that down. As you can see, it's affecting his boot a little bit too much, so I'm just gonna pull that down. Let's turn this off and on. So basically what I want is I want the scene in the bottom to be less noticeable because our rider is already dark enough, and we're gonna brighten up our rider a little bit, but we want this to be less noticeable so that our rider is the first thing that our viewer's seeing. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go create a new mask. I'm gonna hit radial gradient mask. I'm gonna scale in a wee bit to my subject here, reposition. I'm just going to make a radial gradient over my subject here. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to raise up the exposure. And right now my feather is at 100, and so it's really feathered out. So I'm just going to make it a little bit bigger. Let's turn this off and on. So it's bringing a little bit more information back to our subject, and we're gonna do the exact same for the bike. So I'm just gonna do radial gradient again, select my bike. I'm gonna raise up the exposure a wee bit. Perfect. Just gonna click, scale out. Let's turn our mask off and on. So as you can see, this is drawing a whole lot more attention to my subject, bringing less attention to the bottom of the frame, and you could even do that for the sky, you could do that for the sides. Just depends on what you want. You can almost create a bit of a vignette. Totally up to you. I think that this is good enough. And basically the reason for doing all this is so that our viewer can say, okay, I know exactly where to look when seeing this photo. If you're looking to do a deeper dive on this concept, I have a video linked in the description below and you can go click on that to go see that. Number 5, it's important to understand color science. Now, I don't know everything that there is to know about colors, but I did learn how they cooperate with each other For example, like within complementary colors. One of the complementary colors that you're probably most familiar with is the teal and orange look. This look is pleasing because they're an opposing pair on the color wheel. This knowledge becomes extremely useful when you're trying to speed up your editing process. You'll know what will work and what won't work in a shot based on the environment that you shot your photo in. Number 6, learn to retain highlights. When I'm looking through Behance, I'm always so blown away by the professional projects that are shared. And from project to project, there's one thing that all these images have in common. They have controlled highlights. There's definitely a time and a place where blown out highlights are acceptable, but professionals know how to keep those highlights in check so that they don't dominate an image. Like I said before, light is a tool in which you can direct your viewer to where they should be looking in the frame. If your highlights are completely dominating an image and have no purpose to directing the viewer to the subject, then in my opinion, those highlights have no value to be overexposed, and it's an amateur mistake. Let me show you how I control my highlights. Okay, so to demonstrate what I'm talking about, this image is gonna be a perfect example here, so I'm just gonna go full screen. This image is not graded, so what we're gonna do is we're just going to bring back this sky. And obviously when you're dealing with harsh sun like that, it's not going to be possible to bring back all highlights, but you do wanna see more of the sky. That's what I'm going for here. So what I usually do is I pull back my highlights, and I just want you to focus on the sky for right now. So I'm just gonna pull down the whites and look at how much we get back from this raw image as we pull back the whites. And if we were to pull back on the exposure, you'll see how much more we're getting here. So this was actually a sunrise image, and it was a little bit darker because like the sun was just coming up. So I think that this is almost true to what the day was. And if I want to just bring more back to this image, I'll bring up the shadows, bring up the blacks, raise that contrast a wee bit, pull that exposure up just a wee bit, pull back the whites, pull back those highlights. And so these three tools, the exposure, the highlights, and the whites, are gonna be the things that are controlling my highlights the most. Now I'm gonna go to an image where I do have blown out highlights, and this was a stylistic choice that I chose. And so when I say to keep your highlights contained, I'm generally using the whites slider here. So let's say reset the whites. Look at this overall image. Just like look at this area, look at the highlights. It is definitely not as pleasing as when they're more crushed. So watch as I lower this. It almost looks as though it controls the image. It kind of flattens it a bit. But honestly, I think that lowering the whites tab really helps to control the sting out of the highlights, I guess you could say. So let's reset this whites. Just look at how, I don't know, just aggressive these highlights are. And then as I lower it, just watch the image kind of transform here. It really just takes the sting out. And that's what I mean by making these highlights look controlled. Last but not least, number 7, I think the best thing that you can do to find your creative voice is just to experiment. There's tons of incredible work that you can reference and try to emulate. It's not so much about copying somebody else's style as it is getting outside of your comfort zone to see what it takes to create looks just like theirs. I did this a lot at the start of my career, like adding in sun flares or adding in motion blur. And as I tried to do it like the pros, I was able to then expand my creative vision and see what was possible. I really believe that photography is a never-ending journey that we're on. And with every single project that we do, we continue to evolve. But it's so important to set time aside for yourself and push different creative looks and get kind of weird with it. Just see where your creative mind takes you. If you're looking to level up your photography really fast, I think you'll like this video where I talk about the one thing that completely transformed my images almost instantly. I'll see you over in that video. Peace.